Welcome to episode 4 of my Project TBR as I try to read down my owned shelves. You will be able to see in the corner the number of books that are still here to be read. Just a reminder, these are the books that are on my physical shelves and my Kindle in the fiction, poetry and plays formats. I have decided at this point not to include my non-fiction books or my audiobooks. Let's get into my first read. I have discovered something which I think I'm just really late to the game with this because I think everyone knows about the Libby app. The Libby app is connected to your library. I am a member of the Norfolk Libraries, and so I have now finally downloaded that and I've gone through all the audiobooks that they have that I can access and tagged. You can do a little tag in the app to show which ones you're interested in. So I've gone through all of what they have on offer. I sat there one night just scrolling. Instead of scrolling on Instagram, I scrolled on the Libby app and worked out which books they have that I also own and tagged them all with a little tag to say I want to read this. So the first book that I've read for this video though is Mr. Fox by Helen Oyeyemi. I have read another work by Helen called Boy Snow Bird, and I felt a little bit uncomfortable with the narrative of that one because the character who is trans in that, there's like a comment at the end, I can't exactly remember it, but there's a comment where it's like, I want to help you find your way back to who you were before, almost like I want to help you detransition, which felt like it wasn't necessary. You know, you don't become transgender as a response to a specific trauma and then once you've recovered from the trauma want to transition back. Like, I don't think anyway, and I don't think it was meant in a transphobic way, but I think it possibly was out of ignorance, but I don't know. I've never seen Helen Oyeyemi speak on the subject, so I don't know whether she regrets writing that now that she knows more or what her opinion is, but I was sufficiently intrigued by her writing to want to read another book, so I have had this one on my shelf. This is not quite what I was expecting. I picked this up because I thought, after the last book I read, which was The Department of Speculation by Jenny Offill, which is very fragmented, I wanted like a classic narrative. I wanted a story that I could follow from start to end. This is not that. In this, we have an author whose muse, his character, comes to life for him mentally. So his wife believes that he's having an affair, but he has to convince her that actually, no, this is a fictitious woman. I just use her to bounce ideas off of. But the woman is becoming more and more real to him. He can see her in the room. He can speak to her. But again, this is not a linear narrative. We're dipping in and out of this. And every time we come back to him, so he's called Mr. Fox and she's called Mary Fox, different spellings, but it's the same name. Every time we come back to them, it's a slightly different variation on their story. So sometimes his wife has died before he met Mary. Sometimes she's really angry with him. Sometimes she wants him to read her writing and sort of legitimize her as an author. But every time is different. And then interspersed in that, we have short stories as well. And those short stories could be read on their own. They do not rest on the rest of the narrative, but they do add to the wider narrative in themselves, if that makes any sense. So it is another quite fragmented story. Its underlying theme is violence against women, whether that is men manipulating women, women being submissive to men in relationships, actual violence against women, or just how men write women and their reasonings for why women get hurt or killed in stories. So it is a very fascinating idea, very interestingly done, but I don't think I enjoyed myself. I think it's very clever, but I don't think I enjoyed reading it. And I don't know if that's just because that's not what I was in the mood for. I was hoping for something a bit more traditional in terms of how a story was structured, or whether I just fundamentally didn't enjoy this. But again, I feel like I still want to read another Helen Oyeyemi because I don't feel like I've made up my mind on her writing style yet. What do you think? If I've read Mr. Fox and Boy Snow Bird, should I try something else by Helen Oyeyemi? I just don't know. So that's book number 1. The second book I've finished since I last spoke to you is one that I've read with my kids. This is the second book in Mallory Vale and Maggotty Skull. These are so fun to read with kids. I don't necessarily recommend them for adults just to read on their own, but this series, this is obviously book 2, this series is, I think, one of the few chapter books that have brought both my kids together. Often they have very different tastes. Often they don't like reading together. But this one we have really enjoyed all together. There are some really funny characters, so I won't go on too much because I'm not recommending it to other adult readers, but very, very fun to read with your kids. Right, I've just been filming another video, so I am surrounded by books right now, but I just wanted to pop on for this one and say, unfortunately, after reading 2 books in this vlog, I've purchased 2, and I've purchased 2 really chunky ones. I was in the charity shop. I was looking for like Christmas serving plates and things for our Christmas dinner table this year, and I found nothing, so I ended up browsing in the book section, and these are entirely purchased because I like the cover, or I like the title, or the author sounded interesting, premise sounded interesting. I know nothing about these books. I've never heard anyone talking about these, but they just both sounded so suitably interesting that I've purchased them for a couple of quid each. So unfortunately that's 2 more, and I do feel guilty about that. I do feel guilty about doing that, even though I'd already started this series and I knew in there that I shouldn't. I mean, I did put one book back, and the reason I put that book back is because I knew I could get it on audio from the library, and I was like, no, I should just read it from the library. I don't need to purchase the book. But these ones did come home with me. Yeah, so sorry me. I'm only letting myself down. Okay, the next book I've read for this vlog. You don't need to come and squeak. You can actually come over here if you want to. Do you want to come over here? Hello. Hello. So the next book I've read for this little video, I was originally going to make a video reading books that were on my TBR but also mentioned in this video from Reads and Art, 10 African Historical Fiction. I found that I had 3 books on my TBR that were also mentioned in this video. So I was going to do a little video where I read the 3 books that I have on my TBR. It is Homegoing by Gyasi, which is on my Kindle, and then I have Half of a Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. So I read the first one, I read Homegoing by Gyasi. I had this on my Kindle, but I was also able to access it through the Libby app, which is amazing. So I was listening to that on my commute. And the reason I've decided not to make this one video is because the style of all 3 books is very similar. They are all sort of sweeping generational stories. I mean, this one isn't a sweeping generational story, but it felt, when I read the blurb, it felt quite similar to Homegoing. Now, ordinarily that wouldn't be too much of a problem, but I have realised that sweeping generational narratives are not my style of story. It's not something that I'm particularly drawn to. With Homegoing, I think it was masterful. I think it was absolutely brilliant the way it was done. We start in Homegoing in the 1700s with the introduction of the white British slaver to Nigeria. And then we follow 2 sisters initially, and then one of them gets sent off into the slave trade and one of them does not. And then we follow their descendants throughout the ages until we get almost to present day, seeing how their lives differ, how they're struggling against their circumstances. And as I say, absolutely masterfully done. I'm giving this a 4-star, but I very much recognise that this is not my style of story. There was something that it wasn't a 5-star for me because it's just not my style of narrative. And with these being so similar, I didn't want to read them back to back for a video because I thought that might put me off. I thought I might go into a bit of a reading slump. What I would rather do now is sprinkle these in as we go through the year. They're now on my radar. I've now got them in my mind that I want to read them, but I need to, as a mood reader, I need to intersperse them amongst other things to make them that bit more enjoyable. But as I say, I highly recommend Homegoing by Gyasi. What an incredible book. It is actually only, I think, 300 and something pages. I can't believe she fits so much and you felt so connected to each of those characters in such small little chapters because there's so many characters in it. You do get to know each one quite well. You get to understand why they're doing the things they're doing. Yes, as is the nature, because this feels a bit more like short stories. They're like interconnected short stories, I would say. There will be some that you feel you enjoy more than others, but I still felt pretty engaged in every single one. So that was a brilliant book. We keep moving. Let's chuck in another book into this video. I've just finished The Reluctant Fundamentalist by Mohsin Hamid. So the actual last book I read was A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, which was for another video that I was doing. And that is a big, meaty book. And I think while I was reading that, I came to this realisation that I am very much a novella person. I really love this format of writing. I like that you get more than what you get in a short story, but I love how much density you can get in just so few words, so few pages. I really want to be the sort of person that loves a massive book. And there are some books that I've loved that are big, chunky ones, but I often find when reading a big book that what I'm thinking to myself is this could have been edited down. It didn't need this many pages, that it's almost superfluous to the story that it has that many pages. And I think perhaps that's a preference rather than there being finding any actual flaws with those books. It's just that some people love all those extra details, whereas I like something that's little like this. And I was worried that that made me seem like someone who is after something easier. In fact, let me get some of my favourite books off the shelf. Okay, so I've just picked up a couple just to demonstrate, but these are all quite complex books. They're quite poetic, so Rest and Be Thankful. This is a very short book. Let me hold it next to this one so you can sort of see. But this is such a dark look at night shifts among paediatric nurses and how the lack of sleep and the stress of that role can lead you into these really dark places in this almost hallucinatory world. The Department of Speculation, again, very poetic. You're reading between the lines. It's not an easy read. You have to really be concentrating to know what's happening. Near Distance by Hannah Stoltenberg. This is quite a character study of a woman who isn't as maternal as one would expect a woman to be, and she keeps herself on the outside, and to others that seems very judgmental, but she's really just sort of observing rather than judging. We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. This is magnificent. And you get so much of a story, and you get so much of an idea of the girl who is narrating this, or who is the central character in this, and her odd way of looking at the world in such few pages. The Comfort of Strangers by Ian McEwan. This is so atmospheric and oppressive and tense, but again in so few pages. I think I'm just someone who really loves a novella. I think it's pretty masterful if you can tell such an amazing story in such few words and have someone be really engaged with it and have someone really love it. So yes. Having gone on my little tangent there about the novella format, yeah, I really love this one. I think I'm giving this 5 stars. I've read some reviews where people are like, oh, it's too obviously an allegory. You know, the names are so obviously supposed to reference other things. But I think as a story, this works. I hadn't even noticed those similarities. You know, the company he works for, the initials of that company are US. The girl he falls in love with is called Erica, which is so close to America. And so their relationship also becomes an allegory for his relationship with America. But I don't think, until I read those, I hadn't even noticed. And I do think if I reread this, I would notice those things. But because the story was so good, I would possibly even reflect on it and be like, oh, actually. But as I was reading it, that's not what I was thinking. I was so in the story. And it's told in a really interesting way. So it's told in the second person with the narrator talking to you as if you have met him in a cafe. So you are playing the part of an American man in a cafe in Lahore in Pakistan. And he's telling you his story of when he used to live in America and work in America and the woman he falls in love with. And as it goes on, you start getting these little hints that it's not quite as good as it seems. And then 9/11 happens in his story of what happens. And then how people's reaction to him in the street, even though before they'd been perfectly fine, changed so much. How he was approached at the airport when he was traveling for business. All of these sorts of things. I just thought it was really well done. I think this is a fantastic book. And even though it's still a heavy topic, it feels so much lighter than reading something like A Little Life because it's so much fewer pages. I don't know what else to say about it. I think that's going to be the end of this vlog. I think that's enough books for one video. Really pleased with how far I've come.